I recognize the skill, and that's great. But does that put added pressure on you?
Well, in my opinion, pressure is actually a privilege. Because if you're not under pressure, then you probably aren't doing something right. And I think it comes with the territory, I believe. And some of us thrive on pressure. We thrive on being in positions where it's do or die, which it literally is a lot of the times, because some of us, like myself, do not have the privilege of being average. And we have to do well. A lot rides on how well we do. So the naturally to sport, any sport. I believe that pressure is part and parcel of it, but also pressure, like I said, is a privilege, and pressure, I think, is something that we can, convert into energy. We can convert that into great performances, and by performing well, we're able to inspire a brand new generation of of female athletes and young girls who would like to pick up the sport.
Great. Pressure is a privilege. I totally agree with you there. But Ben, I apologize in advance. Normally, you're the one that geeks out. So now I'm going to geek out. So, but you spoke about something earlier, the major differences between the men's game and the women's game. But if you can maybe first start off, one of the areas which we're both passionate about is the scrum. Is there any major difference from the men's game and the women's game when it comes to the scrum? And then second thing, what are the major differences in the game for you compared to men's rugby and women's rugby?
I think broadly, a scrum is a scrum, eh? Um, I think for the women, for us, at least in my opinion, in my experience and opinion, for us, it's at the scrum. Yes, it's about brute force and all of that, but also it's a mind game. It's more. I find that with us is there's much more emphasis on the technicalities of it, um, more than just two pegs just shoving at each other. It's very much a mind game as well. It's a place where we get to exert dominance. We get to show the other team or the other person right in front of you who's in charge. You know, it's where you get to express yourself. It's where you own that space, and that's empowering. It's quite an empowering experience for me. So comparatively with the men's game, from my view at least, is that it's about strength, who's stronger than the other, who gets to dominate the other. Yes, it is about that, but I think it's beautiful how we are able to manipulate it. The process of the scrum, that is, how we are able to use it as a form of expression, and really how we are able to get into each other's minds, and mess about, as the English like to say, in that space. So it's quite interesting for me, and I really, really, enjoy it, because a good scrum for some people will determine how well the rest of the game goes. So it's about just getting in your opponent's head, showing them who's boss, and actually setting the tone for the game, and actually telling them that you actually have to go through me. Let's roll. Let's go. So I get very excited about that. And I think the game as a whole, in my opinion, I think women's rugby is so entertaining. It's energizing, it's electric, it's just all around fun in that it creates community. And anybody and everybody can come through to watch. And the skill set is much higher. Um, we are able to pull off things that are mind blowing, cross kicks and skip passes and what have you. For me, those things are just absolutely amazing. The physical component of it as well, massive tackles, big ball carries, and the combination of those, I think we're able to balance it out so beautifully that it creates pure mind blowing entertainment. Whereas I think the men's game, in my opinion, can be quite boring at times. I'm sorry. I'm just saying it like it is. It can.
Hey, you just killed me. You got me so
you know,
emotional explaining the scrum from your point of view. I had goosebumps, and then you just took the med out
it,
of me.
it feels like it just, yeah, it feels like it's just people just want to run into each other. We love the skills element. We love the soft skills. We love to see those passes. We love to see that jouet rugby. We love to see all of that. So that's just my opinion, of course. I could be totally wrong, but that's just how I see it.
That's amazing. Now, G, you've given me license to geek out because you started it. So I'm going to, but honestly, it's just a quick follow up question on that. Do you think, and I don't disagree with you about the men's game in England anyway, in Britain, to be honest with you, I think you're onto something there when you say that. But do you think the scrum is, or it could be the same, but is it more significant and important in the women's game than it is in the men's game? Do you think, as not just as a way of restarting the game, can it like as a psychological edge? Do you think it's maybe a bit more significant in the women's game?
I think it might even be equally as significant because
Okay.
I think a scrum is quite important for us. And typically for me as
Yeah.
a South African, I really choose a scrum. If I had to choose between a ladder and a scrum, I'd probably choose a scrum any
Yeah.
day. So it's a great it's about setting a platform. It's about the forwards actually feeling that they are doing their jobs.
Who,
Um,
so on that one then, Babalwa, like so, my follow up question before G interrupt and gets his question in, I'll get in there quickly. Like my follow up question is then you are, as you spoke about, you're a pioneer. It's incredible. Like when we sort of sit back and we reflect, like so you're the first doing all these things. So then, who do you follow? Who do you look up to? Who inspires you? Who are your role models? Who do you take ideas from? Who is it? Some completely different sport? Where do you look to? Or is it always changing?
no, it's been quite consistent, especially throughout my professional rugby career. I've always looked up to Tendai Mtawarira. I get to engage with him on or anytime really because he's made himself available to me in that sense. I've always sort of admired how he played. I feel that he's almost revolutionized the prop position, the front row position. That I think he was at the forefront of how props evolved, going from these big, dare I say, fat guys who were just strong to athletic, to powerful. They could move well, they could scrum well, and all those kinds of things. So I've always looked up to him in the way that he played. So he's always been a big sort of influence, purely from a rugby perspective. And post his playing days now, he's just an astute businessman, but also a philanthropist. Things of that nature. I've also looked up to people like Serena Williams, who
Okay.
too have revolutionized tennis completely.
Yeah.
She set the bar and kept raising it
Yeah.
in my opinion. I've been inspired by the likes of Semenya as well, who through massive adversity, was true to herself and also, just changed her event in athletics, altogether. But closer to home, I was fortunate, like I probably mentioned earlier, to have a mentor in Advocate Lwazim Zozoyana, who's also a coach, who's guided and put me on the right direction about a few things because by being the first and being a pioneer and being a leader, being at the forefront of things, you're going to make a lot of mistakes because there is no blueprint a lot of the time. You get to figure out how to do things. For instance, I had to figure out what being a professional women's rugby player is and what it looked like for me. Because before then, where do I look? I had to figure out, you know, how do I best put South African women's rugby forward? Because whether I liked it or not, I represent that. I'm almost the ambassador for it. So I had to figure out what that looks like for me and how to hone in those things. So, yeah, I've had an array of amazing and interesting people to sort of look at, look up to, and draw and find inspiration therefrom.
Wow.
It's great.
You just opened up Pandora's box there, Babalwa. You spoke about adversity. Okay. We've celebrated, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to have you on this podcast because not are you only inspiring for women out there and empowering women, you're inspiring for everybody. What you stand for, and really, as a former rugby player, really massive respect for what you're doing. But we all know it's all great when people celebrate us, the victories, the great achievements. But life is hard. You've touched base. Is there any stories of adversity that you can share with us where you thought, you know what? I'm not going to get out of this situation. Or you know what? This is too tough. I don't think I have it in me. Is there anything you can share with our listeners that you can tell us about what happened and how you got out of it?
Yeah, I think the one that sort of comes to mind and I think might be relevant for the purpose of our conversation and what we're about in terms of rugby has to be injuries. You know, in my career that spans, I'd say about a decade, I've only had two major injuries. One might say that I'm lucky, but being in that position of being sidelined because of injury, you don't get to do as much. You know, you even potentially at the risk of being without an income. Um, you know, those things, one might look at it and think, "Ah, it's just injury," but the psychological aspect of it, of actually thinking, I may not be able to come back, you know, from this and still be, you know, what I've been known to be. You know, you start to question your worth as an individual. You start to question why you do what you do. You know, and you start to think that, yeah, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Maybe this is not meant for me. And, you know, I was never immune to those things, whether it be when I'm injured or, you know, or having to make a decision, especially early in my career, where do I go into the real world and find a job and, you know, provide for my family, or do I chase this dream of being a professional rugby player? And sometimes I'm just like, am I doing the right thing? You know, did I make the right decisions? Um, and I think the answers to those questions, come back to why I do what I do. You know, they come back to the purpose of it all. You know, and it's very easy to doubt oneself and one's ability, especially when you're sidelined and you're watching from the sideline and thinking, if when I come back, if I come back, am I going to be as good as I was? Am I even going to be selected again? You know, so yeah, it just again it comes back to the greater purpose, you know, and you realizing that the only opinion about yourself that should ever matter is the opinion that you have about yourself. You know, off the back of that, for some reason, people think they're now privy to your life because you're somewhat a public figure. You know, people probe into your character and, you know, they poke at the things that you're passionate about. And they poke at your abilities, and what type of a rugby player you are. And again, you just sit and think that, man, this is tough. Why am I even doing this? You know, and then you get to realize that, you know, you had a purpose way before anybody had an opinion about you. So, you know, just broadly, those are some of the things. Of course, personal knocks, which I'm not willing to get into at this point, you know, also play a big role, in all of that. But I think purely from a sport perspective, that somewhat influences life as well is injury. In fact, I'm recovering from an injury right now. I think I'm a week or two off. I should be up for selection next week. But again, you know, your mind start playing tricks on you. You know, maybe you should have stayed home. Maybe you should have stayed in South Africa. Maybe you know, all those types of thoughts sort of creep in. You know, what if you get injured again? What if somebody, you know? But yeah, again, it's about bringing myself back to myself and understanding why I do what I do, why I'm here in the first place, and you know, just you know, finding solace in the fact that you know, I'm incredibly talented. I've proven my worth time and time again, and even that maybe my self worth is not so much linked to to my athletic abilities, you know, because I'm a person before I am a rugby player. So I think it's so important for you know, athletes and young people within the sport to have a purpose within the sport, that their self-worth be not determined by how well they play, how well they're able to kick, how well they're able to scrum, or things of that nature. And yes, life is going to throw even worse sort of adversity and problems than what I've described. Um, but again, it's so important to have a solid you know, base within yourself.